Thank you all for coming. Wonderful, gorgeous day. We have remote participants.
Yes, would you like to?
Somebody to read that.
I move that Meredith Cole's request to attend today's meeting of the JMRL for Technology.
By now.
Board remotely due to a temporary or permanent disability or medical that prevents physical attendance be approved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And I'd like to thank you, Lita Ellis, for having us here today. Lita, is there anything you'd like us to know?
Well, thank you all, and I'm so glad to have you all here at Nelson. There have been a few changes since last year when you all were here last, so I would like to invite you all after the meeting. If you have some time, I'd like to take you on a tour and show you some of the new things we're doing, but particularly I'd love to show you our music garden and our raised planter beds. We had a partnership with Trustees. I enrolled us in like a grant that they had where they would send us free seeds and they just wanted us to use them in certain aspects. So our children outside planting up the raised planter beds was the cutest. I don't know if any of them, some of them had never held a shovel before, so dirt was flying everywhere when they were digging their holes. But I would love for you all to go up and see how I think all of the summer squash and the bush beans are growing.
Thank you. Next, we're going to talk about the minutes of our, let's see, we're in April now, so that makes it in March. Any questions, comments, suggestions, additions to the minutes? Attended with here? If not, may I have a motion to accept them as presented?
I shall move that we accept the minutes as presented.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Announcements.
I have two, if the board doesn't mind. Tony and I both attended a town hall style meeting that Senator Kane held from the Montgomery Floyd Public Library to discuss the closure of the Federal Institute for Museum and Library Services. My main takeaway, it was an open meeting. There were hundreds of people participating virtually and a lot of people in the room. My main takeaway was that the senator supports bipartisan attempts to support libraries through the next budget and appropriation cycle. That was the strategy that he was interested in, but he was attentive to what cuts to IMLS would potentially mean to his constituents in Virginia. So it was gratifying to hear. And then shortly on the other side of that, I shared with you all the good news last Friday that the State Library of Virginia did receive notification that some amount of the funding that is known as the Grants to States program that formerly came from ILS is still coming through to them. So the services that we were concerned JMRL was going to have to immediately lose this September are good and solid for at least another year. So there's good news on that front. If people are asking you, what does the closure of IMLS mean for JMRL? At this point, we're not looking at losing any services anytime soon because of that. And then my second announcement was I just wanted to publicly thank the Friends of the Library for their record-breaking spring book sale. A lot of folks think that the volunteers give so heavily of their time for 2 10-day sales, whereas most of them are actually working year-round, sorting, processing, pricing materials. JMRL certainly couldn't offer the high level of programs and services that are offered without the support of the best Friends of the Library organization in the state. And special thanks to Peter Mano and Austin Connor, the Friends staff, who worked tirelessly to make this one of the best sales I've ever seen. Thank you, friends.
Open for public comments. Do we have anybody online?
If anybody online would like to make a public comment, you can use the Zoom raise hand function now. Any takers for public comment online? I don't believe you have any public comment today.
Very good. And we also do not have continuing education today.
Correct.
So we're moving right along here. So first up under committee appointments and reports is a report from the Fines and Fees Working Group.
All right, we met last week, week before, something like that. And we started to review different reports that were starting to be collected to identify information regarding looking at the benefit or negatives of removing late fees. And we've determined a couple of things that we're gonna work on, and we've got another meeting scheduled for the 12th. I think.
May sometime.
It's been a lot going on. So, anything that
I think that was it. We hit on the committee had asked, the working group rather, had asked staff to come up with some detailed metrics that are currently being collected and can be collected. And so staff shared those with the working group. The ones that were of most interest were two that had to do with how long items are on the hold shelf, being able to look at kind of a large swath of the entire holds collection, how long to pick up basically. And then the other one had to do with return rates and metrics around how many items are returned early, late, or on time, basically. So that was the last discussion that happened.
What is the overall schedule for the working group in terms of coming back to the board as a whole so that we can discuss and make a decision?
we've asked for some of the reports to be fine-tuned to provide us a little more detailed information that we're looking for, and we're hoping that possibly next month's meeting.
Which is 3 weeks away.
Because it's early.
It's spinning.
But I think we talked about if there was a change enacted, there was some timing around that in fiscal years and calendar years. Could you?
Yeah, I think I expressed that my preference is that changes to the fines and fees schedule generally take effect with the beginning of the fiscal year, which would be July 1. Other times we have made changes to the fines and fees schedule are at the beginning of the calendar year, so that's January 1.
So Peter, one variable in my mind is how much baselining, to the extent you're wanting to understand before and after and have would a change affect our metrics of importance? Is between now and July 1 enough baselining for people's comfort level, or would they want a longer baselining period, which might include some seasonality over time? I guess that puts it off for a year if you were to align with a fiscal year. So I'm just putting that element into place. It's really how much baselining is the board interested in, and how long would you want that to take place? I think right now we've sort of just identified, well, here's some things that we're kind of already doing or are at hand so that we can easily baseline. Some of those we just, if recall, correct me if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong. Some of those are already in place, or some of them are sort of just starting now because we looked at, hey, what could we start to collect? Some of those we can retroactively pull reports, and some we can't because they had to start now. So that's I'm interested in anyone's reaction here. How interested are you in this concept of we want to baseline and make sure we understand what metrics are important, and then what understanding when there's a change, how those metrics might have changed. Because that would drive timing. That's a factor in my mind that would drive timing.
If you mentioned July and then January, like is July feasible at this point or no?
It depends on what the full board ultimately will have to make a vote on whatever the recommendation of the committee is. So if the working group, not committee, if the working group were to make a recommendation the board would have to vote on it before the end of the June meeting effectively. So that would mean that the committee, the working group would have to make a recommendation next month. So there's one meeting between now and then.
But was your question, if somehow the board said at June meeting, hey, we want to do this organizationally, would you be able to then put that in place or enact that by July 1st?
Yeah. That's a short turnaround between the fourth Monday in June in order to get the messaging out there. On the one hand, if the decision is to remove overdue fines, then yeah, I think either way, I think we would need more time than that probably to get the word out, to talk to our jurisdictional partners and to make sure people understood and to tweak our notifications and things like that.
So if, again, we're just talking about possible decisions, but if we wanted to, if the working group came back and said, hey, we want to do this at we recommend enacting at the next practicable time, and the board agreed, would remind me again what the significance of January 1st is January.
Yeah, it could be, I mean, it could be at the board's decision.
Right, but
I think another thing is we want to see how long we want to give the public
Right.
to, here's our change, okay, that's one piece of it. But then the interior procedural changes that need to go in, I mean, tweaking the system and so forth.
That, I think that could happen, like Kayla's already been working on contingency plans for that. I don't think that will be the holdup. I think it's the communication.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Be the most important factor.
But so then if Peter had in his mind, or we have board members had in our mind, well, maybe January 1st is a reasonable go live date for a decision along these lines. Does that sound about right?
That would be, I think, more than enough time.
Yeah.
But again, that aligns now with a calendar year, but not a fiscal year.
Yeah.
Does that matter?
It doesn't, the fines and fees schedule gets reviewed annually and the board could potentially at the end of June say, we're gonna hold it as is pending the findings of the working group or whatever.
Yeah, well, we can change it anytime. Right.
I will say that one thing that staff had floated to the working group was to implement automatic renewals on July 1st as kind of we're moving this way, and then to set a later time for a decision if the board needs more time or the working group needs more data for overdue fees. That's just another factor of something that was discussed.
So we'll have this obviously as an agenda item at our May meeting, which has been mentioned several times is 1 week early because of.
Do we have to vote on that automatic renewals or is that
I think that it's a broad enough decision that I'd appreciate the board's weighing in on it.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing for automatic. I know sometimes, well, you always get your book is due in a couple of days and you say, oh yeah, I'll do something. And then you don't.
Mhm.
And
When you say you here, who are we-
yeah, I don't. But if it's automatically,
it would be automatic as long as there was no one on hold.
On hold for it,
If
right.
Hold on it, it would not renew. So that's my only concern about that scenario is that it might take people some time to realize that it's not gonna, I don't have to not worry about it at all because if somebody wants a material, I have.
Right.
How
That's one of those communication.
Yes.
would it affect the ones that are on the shorter terms? They would
Like the 7
automatically,
days.
yeah, like the newer
New book.
books
The-
and stuff.
New books fall under the same loan rules, so if no one's waiting for it, currently you can renew it without having to worry about it. There is no shorter period. The only ones that have a much shorter period are the bestseller copies, which are kind of what they call a lucky day collection. If it's there when you walk in, you can get it. They don't have holds. You can't place holds on them. Those only go out for 7 days and they don't renew at all. So those would remain presumably.
They're exempt from.
Yeah, they're kind of a separate category.
How would this affect interlibrary loans?
Interlibrary loan also follows its own rules based on the terms of the lending library. So the lending library tells us when it's due back. We don't set, and then we set the framework for our lenders.
So that could be a possible confusion for our.
I think most of our users of interlibrary loan now are aware that they have a different, they get, if you've ever seen one, they have a piece of paper on the front that has the written,
Must
we
be
need this
returned.
back by. And generally, I think we try to be standardized about them. I'd have to look this up about when the due dates are, but the institutions that lend them to us are varied. So they're usually on an academic calendar. So usually actually they have a long time before they're due back.
Is there any reason why we wouldn't consider automatic renewals for July?
I think it's a great idea.
Because I don't, like, I was thinking about the pros and cons of keeping them together, or splitting them. I think the messaging will actually be simpler because fines don't necessarily go to, with people, with automatic renewals in people's heads. So messaging them both might be a little right, and also from a measurement perspective, putting them both together might confuse the picture. So I see an advantage in, if we could pull off automatic renewals for July, that would be a nice thing to roll out and a benefit to people. And then for the fine, or for the, I always get fines and fees mixed up, but for the fines, is there, I know you had mentioned those 2 dates. Is there a reason why we couldn't roll that out in like September, for instance?
No, it's a board decision. The board can vote.
Because waiting till January to me feels like, I mean, we had a certain amount of engagement and momentum in the board a couple of months back. And, I think identifying metrics that can be done without too much burden is a good idea, but I also don't want to just lose momentum and have to like start all over trying to remember why we were talking about this. And to me, January seems like a long time away, whereas like September seems feasible, and that the working group could have 1 or 2 more meetings, come back with some recommendations, and then we could discuss it and make a decision.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons we originally talked about doing it fiscal year was, of course, because, we were going to move things from areas of the budget, the equipment fund was funding fines, it was funded by fines and fees, so we were looking at the fiscal year as the cutoff if we were going to move it on. But if we're doing something with very little budget impact, which would be automatic renewals, then yeah, I mean, I think that we could easily roll that out, regardless of the time frame. But the other pieces that actually impact the bottom line, the budget, I think we need to take into account. Okay, we have a budget in place for this much, which is predicated on X dollars, right? And then if we were to flip the switch at this point, can we handle the transfer or something like? And I leave it up to the working group and the board to make that decision. But yeah, I don't see any reason why January 1st has to be the next date if we don't meet July 1st.
But yeah, so I mean, I think what I would just like to see is that we make sure that we make time to make the decision, that we don't just miss deadlines or dates because we don't have it's like there are a bunch of issues of, on the budgeting side, we would have to really look at the consequences of doing that. Like say we made a decision to do this in September, what would be the impact on the budget cycle that we're already in, and and how could we handle that as opposed to having to wait for a new budget cycle. And then there's the communications and just whatever changes to technology to make sure that it works and so forth. So, it's the kind of thing we have to get on the board agenda in advance, right? So, I guess I'm just asking partly the working group to be working with you, David, to just make sure that we're not, going so far that we miss a key date where we can't, then we lose the ability to make the decision.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and thanks to the working group for keeping at this. Appreciate it.
But wait, we haven't decided on,
No, we haven't decided anything.
I know, but I'm just saying, on the issue of automatic renewals, can I mean, can we decide that now?
We
or
can talk
we
about that
put
in May. We can talk about that in May. That's
No,
fine.
I'm just asking whether we can put that on the agenda in May.
Sure. You want. So that would be outside of working group report, there would be a board discussion or potential decision about automatic renewals.
With Ann's name next to it, by the way.
And I would think we would continue our discussion in the working group, and come back with, hey, here's what
Yeah.
here's where we've gotten on the learning curve, and just so the whole board is not starting from scratch.
I will warn everyone that the May agenda is going to be very long, but it's all good stuff.
Needs review.
Stuff. What do you mean? Okay, technology committee report.
So let's see, I had some notes here. So yeah, we had staff technology updates from Kayla, Sarah, and Fred. We had a pretty deep, rich discussion around the committee scope and purpose. And then David gave an update on JMRL IT budgeting. And we can fill in on any of those in details on any of those topics, but there were two things I wanted to kind of highlight. One was that the issue of compensation came up. Fred talked about the challenges of hiring people in technology roles with salaries that are well below market rate, as much as, I mean, in the corporate world, those kinds of salaries are 2 to 3 times as high and, taking 2 years to try to fill a position. And, from my perspective, I mean, this is not news to anyone, right? But for the whole library, the pay scale is a problem. And it's especially problematic in IT where there's just an even larger disparity if you sort of look at other organizations. And my sense is that there's a fragility in the library with respect to IT because you've got a small staff that is stretched thin. And if those folks decide to leave, it's going to be very hard to fill those shoes. And for many of them, it seems to be very much a labor of love that they just really care about the library, and that's why they're working so hard and sticking around. So to me, it just the thing I wanted to kind of just bring to the board is, I don't think we probably want to put this in the May agenda, but I would like to see us have put on an agenda a discussion around the sort of question of like, how might we lift the pay scale to a competitive level more quickly? And what would it mean for the board to be more proactive on this issue? And just to have that conversation as a board. So that's one thing that came out for me. And I guess before we move on to the second point, are there questions or thoughts on that?
Well, the pay scale should be raising for fiscal year 26. So that could have a board discussion and vote on adopting the new pay scale, which is a 5% increase across the board of the current pay scale. So maybe that's the appropriate framing for a conversation in June about like, hey, here's where we have been, here's some history, here's the changes that have been made, here's the, rehashing some of the salary study information that we did last year, and then let the board have a discussion at that point. I think that's a good timing on the budgetary cycle because it's before we start thinking about fiscal year 27, but we'll know for sure where we are for fiscal year 26.
And the question, the thought in my mind, is there pre-work that, because often we operate by committee, so before we come to a full board, we do have a personnel committee and also a budget committee. Is there pre-work that smaller group would do to then bring a more fleshed out starting point, rather than starting with a board level agenda item? I don't know, but I'm open to thoughts on that.
Yeah, David, I wonder if it would make any sense. So in the past, in my recollection, you sort of said, I'm, for instance, recommending a 5%, increase. Could we do it where there's like a small, medium, large version where there's like, what would be the implications of asking for 7%, for instance?
Yeah, we usually run those scenarios on the staff end, and the personnel committee will potentially discuss them most years, but sometimes the answer is clear. But certainly we can do, Jerry and Donnelly and myself will be doing that work anyway.
Yeah.
So certainly, yes, we can do that.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think June sounds.
If nothing else, in June, there'll be a discussion about adopting the 5% increase to the pay scale for next year, which is what we've worked through budgetarily. So that started with the personnel committee last September,
gonna
you
say
know, and,
fall.
right, yeah, exactly, and this is the culmination of that.
And I guess, I mean, there are other issues of it, beyond simply the overall pay scale. I personally would just like to be better informed on issues around, right? Is there wiggle room to elevate the IT pay scale without causing too much friction across the system? And I guess a similar delicate issue is, are the pay scales all the same at all the branches, independent of cost of living differences, or are there?
Yeah, it's monolithic.
Yeah, so that's another issue that at least I feel like we should be informed about, and, if we're gonna make these kinds of decisions.
Sure.
The second point you want.
Second point was committee scope and purpose. So we looked at the technology committee mandate that's in the JMRL policy, section 1.23, and made some suggested edits that I think our suggestions would. David knows better the actual flow of like, does this go to the policy committee and then to the board? So I don't know if you wanted to show those or not, but.
My impression from the technology committee is that there was still a little wordsmithing to be done, and the technology committee had to come up with a consensus to, here's what we would like the policy committee to vote on, then it goes to the policy committee, then the full board.
Okay. But they're really just updates to align with just how the world actually works now. So it's not, I wouldn't say that it's an expansion or a contraction of scope. It's just an updating.
I can find them if you want to show them.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks.
Policy committee report.
Okay, the policy committee met today and finalized a recommended draft for the full board of policy 4.41 bookmobile and mobile library services. So I think we have a first reading of that shortly here on our agenda. We also looked at policy 2.44 employment references, and there's some discussion of, it's sort of an internal facing I'm trying not to use the word procedure here, but there's some, we're putting some boundaries in communicating to staff who might want an employment reference. Who do you work through, and what are the parameters and so forth. So there's some discussion of whether if there's a reason that needs to be a policy at the policy level, or if it should just be deprecated as a policy and moved into procedure. And we heard some input from, David had gathered some input from Charlottesville HR, who basically said, yes, you need to have this in writing, but that didn't dictate policy versus procedure. So I think we're doing one more round of information gathering, starting with our insurers, to kind of give us more information about if there's a reason to recommend one of those practices versus another. So, but I think wordsmithing, there was one small change, and I think otherwise we're generally happy with the language. It's just a matter of where should that live organizationally, it should be written down, but where should it be written down? We have one more round, I think, of information before we come up with a recommendation. I think that's all I have for policy committee. Any questions on that?
The recommendation, like if someone is asking someone in their office for recommendations, there's a procedure that they need to follow.
Right. So we have that as a policy now. And the advisement that we've gathered so far is that we need to have it, what the procedure is, to be written down somewhere. But does that need to be in the policy manual, or a procedure manual, which is controlled on the staff side, or just in the employee handbook? There's also some.
Or both.
Yeah, or both. Right now, there's a kind of a summary in the employee handbook, which is generally how the employee handbook operates. It summarizes information that the staff needs to know, and then it points back to the slightly more detailed procedure, or I'm sorry, slightly more detailed policy. So we'll get there, but it's just where what's the pros and cons of having this thing that's really just internally oriented in the policy manual that's published for, all the general public to consume and use.
Questions? All right, thank you. I see Meredith is with us. We can talk about the strategic plan review. You thought you were done, but no, you got pulled back in, so.
Well, David and I met about a week and a half ago to talk a little bit about, the meeting. Every year we need to look at the implementation plan for the strategic plan. And so David and I sort of went through what the info we had, and he was checking with some folks, I think, about where that was, and sort of making sure that every part of the plan was progressing and that someone was assigned to work on that. Am I remembering all this correct, David? And it looks like you have all these pieces out. I don't know if you want to share the
Yeah.
document.
I'm happy to do that and to talk about some of them.
Yeah.
It's in your handouts. So as a reminder, the board's policy is and maybe I will just remind everybody what that looks like. The board's policy is a very broad level document for the strategic plan based on JMRL's identified values. So the goals and strategies there are very high level about here's what the board would like to see the library do. And then there's the associated staff implementation plan, which drills down into strategies, objectives, and key performance indicators for each of the areas that were identified by the board. So as Meredith described, we went through the ones that were kind of either ongoing or due at the end of this fiscal year, and we reviewed where we were, and I checked in with some staff to see where we are on them. So if the board doesn't mind, I'll go through these and then you can ask any questions you have. And just as a reminder, so in red are the goals, in blue are the strategies, and purple are the objectives, and in green are the key performance indicators. Sure, I'm going to massacre that as we go through. So what I was looking for here are areas in which the key performance indicators were something that we need to look at annually, or that we need to have something in place by the end of this fiscal year. So under the We Serve Our Community heading, there was a goal, an objective rather, that says school homeschool partnership, increase card holdership and access to digital resources. And the timeline here was annual. The desired outcome was number of juvenile cards on the rise, increased digital circulation of juvenile accounts. So the circulation is holding pretty steady. It has not seen a dramatic increase since this was requested last year, but this is something we'll track annually. Between 14,000 and 15,000 checkouts for juvenile cards. The focus from staff here has been on tweaks to the summer reading program. To encourage easier sign up, to have broader messaging about it. So we're looking forward to seeing the results of that this summer. Both the Children's Services Manager, the Children's Committee, and the Young Adult Services Manager and the Young Adult Committee have worked very hard to present a summer reading program this year that we felt was more accessible. I'm going to talk briefly about it in my director's report. It really should be a CE of its own, but the majority of the focus for this strategy here has been to increase summer reading participation this year over last year. Stop it if you have any questions at any time, just throw them out there. What's the purple? Another objective here under the broad We Serve Our Community was to make partnership opportunities more visible and shareable. And the desired outcome was increased requests for partnership. This one is by the end of this fiscal year, so it's very targeted. The form is visible on the website. We added a page too for how to request partnership. How do I partner? If you search that partner, how do I partner? That's the top search there. So we've got 47 requests so far this fiscal year, which is not as many as we had all last year. So far we're not meeting this metric. But that's just for program partnership. That's just if an outside group wants to perform a program or to be involved in a program. The next objective is also very closely related. which is identify organizations providing services aligned with JMRL's mission in the region, regularly check to make sure there's no duplication of efforts, and look for opportunities to partner where purposes are aligned. So I surveyed our branch managers and got some samples of partnerships that have been put into place this fiscal year. And I'll just this is not an entire list. This is just from the folks that I was able to get in touch with, but JABA, the Jefferson Area Board for the Aging, jurisdictional registrars, the Health District, Legal Aid, the food banks in multiple jurisdictions, the Local Energy Alliance Group, the VA 250 Group, which is working on the 250th anniversary of the America, the Fralin Museum at UVA, local schools, the Botanical Garden for the Piedmont, local historical societies, the UVA chapter of Ballet and Books, Piedmont Master Gardeners. Take a look out for the tallest sunflower contest to be judged this summer at the Albemarle County Fair. Seeds are available at select JMRL locations. UVA Girls in STEM Club, the Virginia Literacy Partnership, Boys and Girls Club, Ready Kids, People Places, local visitor centers, the Shenandoah National Park, and Piedmont Virginia Community College. So there has been a concerted effort by staff to reach out and partner with organizations that are offering services that align with our missions and to work closely with them. But for the previous one, the increased request for partnerships, I think we still have some PR work to do there. Okay, by the end of fiscal year 25, Peter, develop a new pay scale for JMRL staff. So, and we will get into this in June, it sounds like, but the goal here was to come up with a new graded pay scale for JMRL where every person would know out of the 15 steps that they were in, like the federal government, where they would be the next year. We were relying on the support of the city of Charlottesville's HR department and their previous director. That director had since left, and they only just got a new director a few weeks ago. So this has not progressed. And instead, at my recommendation, what the board did for this year was on lifting the entire pay scale that we currently have. So instead of developing a new pay scale, 5% increase to the current one, there's plenty more to talk about there as the board just discussed. Let's see, we provide free, equitable, open access to information. The purple is update JMRL's collection management plan, set frequency for regular review. This is on pace to be complete. The board should expect a continuing ed before the end of the calendar year on this. It was a little bit, not held up, but it was waiting for the policy that the board voted on 2 months ago to be complete. Now that the policy is complete, the plan can follow. It shouldn't be a dramatic change from the current plan that's out there, but the idea here was to have a staff level procedure that the board would endorse, and then we would then publicly meet with the policy so that people who had questions could see both in the same place, which is not all the procedures are out there for the entire world, but this one gets enough people asking about it that we'd rather make it easier. Continue to improve the JMRL website and catalog experience. So the technology committee talked about this at length the other day. This is an annual goal. The other one was by the end of this fiscal year. So yeah, you might not get the CE before the end of June, because it sounds like we've got a compressed timescale for the things that the board needs to do, but the plan should be complete by the end of the year. Website and catalog experience, ongoing. The latest big news that Sarah mentioned to the technology committee last week is fixing an issue in the program calendaring that allows patrons to correctly filter for programs that are for multiple age groups. Previously, if it was tagged for children and adults, if you filtered for one of those, you wouldn't see it. So this was a long-standing kind of bug request, so that if you were searching for juvenile things, you would see multi-age things as well. So this is just an example of the types of things improvements that are ongoing.
Question on this one. So the blue strategy
Thank you.
is to promote awareness and discoverability of library resources.
Yeah.
The outcome that we're targeting or identifying is increased usage of JMRL's digital resources.
Yes.
2 questions. How generally do you kind of measure that or think about understanding whether digital resources have been increased in terms of metrics and information collection? And then how does that map into awareness and use of library resources in general?
Yeah.
Because if you're saying, oh, well, our digital catalog got more use, and that might be I'm sure it's a good thing if our resources are being more used, but how does that adapt to, how does that map to the broader?
I would say that this is not the only objective associated with that strategy. It's just the only one that has a due date now.
I see.
So there are other metrics there
I
that
see.
belong to this, that are there in order to promote awareness and discoverability of library resources.
So this whole document we're going through today is just the subset.
Correct. This is not the entire
I see.
strategic
Got it.
implementation.
Okay, that's good to know. And then, okay, so then,
Yeah, so.
what is usage of digital resources
Usage, right,
mean to
so-
you from a metric standpoint?
So I would say that this is the way that we report out to the board tends to be circulation of digital materials, which is maybe not the metric we're looking for here, because that we're just gonna win every time. Like the growth
Yeah.
in that collection is.
There's an underlying trend.
So that, I can point to and say, oh, great, look at all of our digital checkouts, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here. So I think instead we would be doing things like, we can search for we can get information on using our databases. We get numbers from our vendors there on the usage of those like resources that are provided. And then we could also look at just general like heat mapping, things like that for the website itself. For the catalog, it's a little bit harder. I mean, we can dig down and see failed searches, what are things that didn't pop up, but I don't think there's one metric that encompasses that whole KSI. That's a good question though, Mike. I'm interested in maybe we can come up with one ring that binds them. Okay, foster, promote, and develop employees, increase training and cross-training opportunities, building capacity and competency. So this is going very well. We're about to start year 3 of cross-training. Year 1 was all circulation for everybody at JMRL, where everybody on staff had to work at a public service circulation desk. Year 2 was more wide open, and people could work in different departments. They could go work in a specific children's department. They could go to the Friends of the Library and see how Peter runs the operation there. Somebody sat down with Jerry in the business office and they learned about paying for friends, things like that. So it's all available for staff. It is a requirement that they participate. The training committee is also working on reviving branch tours for staff. This is a pre-COVID thing where new staff would actually get in the bus and take 2 days and drive all the way around JMRL. And that's a little bit harder to do these days just because the staff is a little bigger than it was then. So we're working on a passport system where you get a little stamp after you've gone to every branch. And there's an incentive at the end, but I'm happy with this work, and it's thanks to the work of the training committee. Okay, related, ensure JMRL staff are equipped, enabled, and empowered to provide the best library service and grow in the roles by bolstering employee safety, collaboration, and mentorship opportunities, improving inter-staff communication. We did an entire, I say we, Sarah Elizabeth did an entire revamp of the staff intranet, which you all have access to. Much more user-friendly, revived the staff directory, which had been broken for a while, so it's easy for staff to see who's working there and get contact information for new folks. And also our PR specialist is going to be working on reviving the staff newsletter, which was also a COVID casualty. It used to go out once a month with some of it was like a reference corner where they would say, here are some new resources available. Some of it was the board reports that Ginny Reese used to keep from the board meetings to let staff know, here's what happened in the board meeting. And some of it was more like, here's a picture of my cat. That was the most popular part. That's been usurped, I think, by the JMRL's cat chat. That's a whole other.
The question here, if our one of the desired outcomes is patron satisfaction of library service.
Yeah.
How do we metric?
Yeah.
Emphasize that one.
I think that probably will be wrapped into other strategic planning things, like the technology committee was talking a bit about like the needs to survey or to do kind of spot check testing with folks. So this is not, we don't do an annual satisfaction survey, right? This is an ongoing annual goal. So I think this is probably more like our strategic planning committee will come up with in the years to come, like, hey, how do we check in with folks on where we are on these?
Okay. I mean, to my mind, this is the overarching metric in many ways. So patron satisfaction of the service.
Yeah, right.
We want, if they're satisfied, they're going to be advocating for funding, and where there's funding, we'll be able to fund services. So I would be in favor of finding a way to systematize this, collecting, there's some identification here, some definition of what does that mean, and come up with some to try and get at it.
Yeah, the thing that we point to a lot is just one of our jurisdictional partners does an annual services survey to all the folks that live there, and they have a ranking system. They ask questions or whatnot. So for one of the 5, we can annually point to work that an outside organization did that says, here's where we rank, here's what our users think about JMRL.
But there's no, if a program is presented, there's no survey after that.
Only on a targeted basis, so no like generic program. No, only like sometimes we'll do that for a pilot program or for summer reading, we'll probably do some of that.
Yeah, because I would think if they do it 6 months, well, you might have had a really nice time at something about six and a half months ago, and you say, yeah, but I can't remember all the details.
What you've done for me lately.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is good feedback on getting feedback. So most of our feedback is passive at this point. We have like links from the website. We went through a whole revamp of our passive feedback collecting years ago, and we do collect and look at that information for trends, but that's not going out and asking people about other services. It's letting me know like the parking is no good here, or I love this program. Okay, where were we? Yes, provide equitable access to training for existing and emerging technologies, increase patron access to JMRL's makerspace and digital media labs, including adding needed services and equipment annually. The desired outcome here is increased patron familiarity with new technologies and access to maker technology. This is ongoing. The board will hear more next month with the CE from Fred Hilton and a tour of the space at Mont Ave at the Central Library, and you'll probably see some more from Yulita this afternoon if you go through the lab that's here. Offer a diverse range of programs, resources, and services aimed at creating a culture of inclusion and to review programs, resources, and services as community needs change. This is a very broad one, even for the staff implementation plan, because it's including service hours, schedules, community collaborations, outreach, and branch locations. So I think we were thinking much broader than just saying like, oh, I wish story time was at 10 instead of 11. This is more like, do we need a new library here? Or do we need more hours here? Okay, so this is something that we constantly work on, that the board should be involved in when we talk to our jurisdictional partners. And as I mentioned last month, when they're doing their strategic planning, also we're working with them about what the needs of the community are. So yeah, this is an ongoing goal. We're working with jurisdictions via our budgeting process and via our strategic planning and their strategic planning. Almost done. Update JMRL style manual, including adding branding templates for staff to use. Dylan is working on this right now. The managers at their monthly meeting in May are going to be reviewing a draft of that and taking some feedback, and then it will go out to all staff, and I can share with the board as well. So I'm very happy with the progress made there.
Question here. When is the last time we updated our brand?
The entire brand?
Yeah.
I'd have to look at the date of the style manual.
Yeah.
It's been at least 10 years.
It's been, I was in my last tenure on the board that we had a design. Charrette.
Charrette.
We had a charrette where we came up with the new, and Crystal will remember this.
Yeah, Grow, Learn, Connect came out of that.
There we go,
Color
Grow, Learn,
scheme.
Connect, there we go. That was, yeah.
Okay, so the detail, so my question is, how frequently would we think about revisiting our branding overall, which is a big deal, I understand, but it also over time, branding
Yeah, it gets
is
stale.
stale and there's opportunity for improvement potentially. How often would we do that? What would trigger a brand review? What's the process? Right now, my impression, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's kind of, we got branding and we're just rolling with it until further notice.
Yeah, I think that it's largely driven by what tools our PR specialist needs, so if if they're coming to me and saying that our branding doesn't meet our needs for getting our messaging out there, then it becomes more of a priority. I think right now we have, yeah, to your point, the library has been happy with the branding. It's pretty well received. I think it still looks okay. It's not, the freshest thing ever, but it doesn't look dated to me. But I'm not a specialist on that, so right now we're relying on Dylan to tell me.
Yeah. Is there, I'm just organizationally, let's imagine I said, hey, we should just review it every 10 years, like we do our policy. Where would that live, or what committee would even do that? And as a side note, the result of a review might be, hey, we're good to go. How would that fit into our existing? Is that a staff thing? I've been told, and sometimes that looks and feels are staff oriented. Would it be a board committee somewhere? How would this happen?
We don't have an existing staff level committee that I'm aware of that would be working on this. We kind of have PR liaisons at every branch that are working right now specifically on getting out these branch specific newsletters that are starting next month. So if you want news just from the Nelson branch, like what the programs are here, those folks are working on that. Our goals have been more recently to try to make sure that our current branding is applied consistently. That's what the focus has been, because I think I've mentioned before that a few years ago when access to the program Canva became available for all of our staff, like everybody loves it, and everybody except for me is a genius at creating flyers, handouts, things like that, like using graphics. And so the focus has been making sure that those folks are using our current branding. So it has been a little in the weeds on that point. Mike, I don't know the answer to who, I can't think of one of the board committees outside of the policy committee that would be talking about it. It's always come out of the office of the PR specialists. Any thoughts, Krista?
No, I think unless there was an obvious disconnect or a concern with our branding that the public noted, which has happened with place names and other things.
Yeah, that's true.
Then there would be cause to make a change.
But I hear your point, Mike. We won't know unless
We
we.
had that with the naming briefly.
Sure. Well, I guess my motivation here is just thinking about what would it look like to operate from a perspective of opportunity sometimes, because there is an opportunity versus an opportunity, a mindset of necessity. And I think there should be a balance there. And overall, I think kind of everything should be reviewed for opportunities with some frequency. And again, that might be 10 years, which is a long cycle. But okay, for today, the answer is kind of it's not something we've really thought about in this way, it sounds like to me.
Yeah,
It feels like it could come up in the context of the strategic
the
plan and the strategic
Yeah.
implementation plan, because it's that big of a deal. It's not like something you just, it'll touch every, right, it'll touch, the entire
Every sign
website
comes
would have to
down,
be done,
every
every,
website.
it's across all media. It's,
The last time it happened, Peter, to what Tony was mentioning, JMRL was the recipient of a local design contest, basically, where a group of designers do a pro bono job for a group every year, and they worked on JMRL and then came up with a great product. So that was an opportunity that I don't think anybody was planning for or expecting that happened. This was before I was the director, so I don't remember the specifics, but it was not so much dropped in our lap, but there were a lot of communications about it, but it was an opportunity that arose that the PR specialist and director at the time jumped on. So yeah, I'd be interested too in setting a schedule for a review there. Krista,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It was a design marathon. It was an opportunity. If that kind of opportunity came up again, we might do it. We've also had people ask us, because some libraries have little like mascots, like it's an owl or a bee or an owl, like that's come up occasionally, like to have this, besides our logo, have some sort of thing that, is JMRL. But I think, before it's always been kind of opportunity. And Jackie Lichtman was the one who, way back when, got us involved in that design marathon. It took place at City Space.
This particular purple thing here, the focus that Dylan is working on now is just getting the staff style manual correct and up to date with what we're currently doing. Like, if you look at, it's available on the internet for you all to look at, but it has things like, what's the appropriate way to say audio cassette? And that's just not relevant anymore. So it was more like getting the tool that we had. And something Peter said earlier was about the technology committee goals. It's like having it reflect what the reality is right now. So that's how we've interpreted this goal for this year, but we could take a broader view and look at okay, we need to look at the big picture, and do these colors still work? Does this tagline still work?
I agree that my question was not targeted on the scope of this. It was just sort of prompted by thinking about the idea that we're consolidating our scope. All right.
Okay,
Put it back in people's minds.
Two more that were kind of had timelines associated with the end of this fiscal year or ongoing. One was under the expand outreach services within a coordinated regional framework. Was to create a JMRL outreach committee by the end of fiscal year 25. And to provide staff with tools to expand the footprint of their branch and department, provide patrons with a consistent experience at outreach events. So this committee has been created. The hard thing is finding a time for them to meet. Basically, it's chaired by Marion Ruiz-Villeman, who's our Bookmobile and Outreach Services Coordinator, and frequently where the Bookmobile is where Marion is. So it has met. There is a targeted effort to getting the same materials available at every branch, so that if the Nelson staff gets asked to go to an event at the school, they have the same materials that the Louisa staff has when they go to some sort of event there. So this is a good idea, and it has happened. We have met the purple there, but it's still a work in progress in terms of it's a standing committee now, basically, for staff.
And I know I'm asking a lot of questions and running out your voice, but I've been confused about this in the past, and just remind me, what is our definition of outreach in the? Talk about this.
Library service or promotional appearances outside the library walls. So largely this is going to an outside location. Historically for JMRL, it was a lot. It was children's services, right? Going to a school, especially this time of year where our staff will be going out to school groups and talking about summer reading. That was our outreach. So then we get asked now to come to a lot of other events. I come to the city market, come to the farmers market in Nellisford, come to these events, have a table and talk about library services. So this was to create a more a singular vision for that, so that staff at every location could share the same materials. A lot of it is making library cards on the spot, which is something that we can do, or sometimes it's more in depth than that, and it's providing some sort of story time or service, and that means pulling in folks that have that expertise.
Thanks.
Okay, the last one. So this one we've been talking about for a long time. It's educate stakeholders about the funding structures and operational needs for JMRL. This really came up in the last month or so when we got a lot of questions from members of the public and from elected officials or staff at our jurisdictions when IMLS was shut down about, oh, does this impact JMRL? So we had to go through kind of, staff had to prepare some talking points. And Mike, you've advocated for this for a long time, something to hand out that says, here's how it works. So Dylan is working on something now, basically, be done by the end of June. So it's something that I can show to the board, get some feedback on before we make it widely available. And that's the end of the goals, strategies, objectives, and key performance indicators that either had an end of fiscal year 25 deadline or things that we're looking at annually.
So we're still in year one of
5-year strategic plan.
right.
And the committee will meet annually to review the plan itself and then to talk about changes to the, which is a staff level procedural document. So things will change in there, and I'll make the board aware of them if something's not going to happen or something's no longer needed or add something. In fact, this is some of the technology committee talked about, making it more of a fluid thing on the technology specific objectives.
So I think this is a great exercise.
Yeah. Me too.
So thank you for doing it. My question is for everyone, this could conceivably happen within the scope of the 5-year committee. This whole agenda item could have just been a committee activity or exercise. What do people think about, and is that the proper scope there, or is this better to bring it to the full board? And Meredith referenced the meeting, was that a committee meeting that
That
was
was
held?
just Meredith
Yeah,
and I.
that's what it sounded like.
I will say that I think the reason this is on the full board's agenda is, well, one, it's on the board and budget timeline. Two, I believe it's one of the board self-evaluation metrics. Do we review the strategic plan annually? So that could be a report out from that committee.
Exactly, yeah, right.
But I
I think
believe
it
the
should
reason-
happen, but I'm asking where.
The reason we do it this way is because that's been the interpretation.
I think, I mean, personally, I like it as a board agenda item because it raises other issues, for instance, the branding thing, which we may not have thought about, you know. So I think it's a good use of time, personally.
Meredith is unmuted. That might mean she wants to say something.
No, I mean, I think ever since I joined the board, we've done it as a board meeting. So I think it's a great strategy, and I think it was a useful exercise for David to really check in with the people who are owning each task to say, where are we? What are you reporting on at this point? You know, and knowing that we were going to come in front of you and you were going to ask questions about what is our progress after 1 year. So I think it was useful, but we're happy to do other ways. I mean, he's not doing every single task. These are the tasks that are actually due right now on the next 2 months. So
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you, David, for putting that together and doing the background work on it.
Sure. I think we could revise that conversation when the board looks at the schedule for next year to say, hey, like, what level do you want this conversation?
Yeah. Okay. First reading of policy 4.1.
Okay, the bookmobile policy based on discussion, and by the way, our bookmobile manager, tell me if that's the exact right title,
Bookmobile and Outreach Services.
outreach services manager, was also involved in, gives a lot of great feedback, so was involved in the discussions here to help us map from what are we doing now to what's the right level of, at a policy level, to describe that both to the public and put the right parameters in place for staff. So a lot of the existing policy, which you don't really see here, had a lot of kind of very detailed if-then type language that we've abstracted down to the procedural level and just focused on what we need to communicate to the public about what the mobile library services are. So the primary vehicle that we use to implement mobile library services is the bookmobile, but there's a few other tweaks. So we wanted to broaden the name of that to incorporate. So that's kind of the first change. It's no longer just the bookmobile policy, it's mobile library services, parentheses bookmobile. Start with an overview of what the purpose of mobile library services are and what the bookmobile is historically and currently. Then we've moved to some bullet points of here are the things you can expect from services. Here's on the bookmobile, here's the services you can expect to that are offered and things that you might be interested in but are not available through the bookmobile. Then structurally here, just continuing, we define that there's two primary models of mobile library services. There's a regularly scheduled bookmobile route and schedule with stops and locations. But then we also do sort of one-off events, which are these outreach events. So you can also request, hey, can the bookmobile come to my festival or my school? And that's not a regularly scheduled stop. There's a distinction there that would be a one-off. So we're sort of just defining that and identifying that distinction. With the regularly scheduled stops, I am moving, thank you, David, to the top of the next page. Here's the general criteria that we use when we're deciding or formulating this schedule. It gets reviewed periodically, and if you want to be included in that schedule, here's how you do it. You visit the page and fill the form. and then some high-level comments about availability. There's the weather decision of whether the bookmobile is operating or not aligns with public schools in the jurisdiction. And we're just doing that to make it simple for everyone to understand sort of the yes or no, what do I expect today? There's a description for everyone that the bookmobile is sort of separately and specifically funded by jurisdictions. So some of our jurisdictions are doing that to a different degree and different amounts of hours and so forth. And I think one or two are not. And so we're just sort of wanted to convey that to the public as, hey, why don't I have a bookmobile in my county? Well, it's up to what the jurisdiction's choosing to fund. We do have other vehicles. There's one in particular in Nelson County that was funded by a grant in this case. But we're just mentioning that it's not only the bookmobile, it's other stuff that we may, based on technologies now known or future developed in the future. If you want to go through, so that's just a walkthrough as you were skimming. We did have in today's meeting a fair bit of wordsmithing. I don't think anything substantively changed any meanings, but we tweaked some words and moved some sentences from one spot to another for flow and structure and so forth. So just a heads up that the draft that's in your handouts is not the final recommended draft. That is on the screen, and there's some, red and green and black change tracking to help you sort of map from one to the other. We can talk through those. I think for today, I don't know. We'll ask what questions you have. That's what I think is a good reading for today, is kind of talk through the scope and purpose. If what you'll see to vote on and discuss for next month would be, I think, a consolidated version where we're saying, hey, here's the final. In other words, all the strikeouts will be deleted and the red words will just be incorporated. Deleted.
The special outreach events like community festivals, I think that the bookmobile is really booked up. I was just wondering how they're fitting in those special.
It's generally on the weekends or in the evenings.
Okay.
If it's during the traditional business hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, the bookmobile's really not available.
Yeah.
So it's usually like a school, like a PTO event in the evening, or going to the festival, right? They did a thing at the Charlottesville City Market, the Louisa African American Heritage Festival, things like that. The Dogwood Parade, summer.
How does that work from a staffing perspective? Do we have a pre-existing staff pool, and if we can fit it in, then
Yeah.
do?
It effectively means that right, so it's Marion and 2 part-time employees.
Yeah.
So it's juggling a schedule around basically. So one of them would have to cover that person's normal driving shift during the week so that person is available to work on that. Summertime is the busiest time for that.
Okay, comments or questions or anything that we should re-look at in more?
Can I just say that the green are things that the committee wanted to move to reprioritize, and the biggest one of those was wanting to make sure, one of the things that the committee had decided last meeting was to try to let the public know that anytime you see the bookmobile stop somewhere, it is free and open. So if it's stopped in front of what to you seems like, oh, that's for that nursing center or whatnot, it's still available for you to come in at any given time.
So I think in handouts, I guess we would print this change tracked version, and then the final consolidated proposed version for purposes of a potential vote next
Well,
month.
I was thinking I could just circulate this one
Yeah.
now, and then next month it could just be a clean.
So second reading would be next month.
Yes.
Yeah. That okay with everybody? All right.
Meredith has her hand raised.
Sure.
Quick question. Are you going to sort of change the website then to reflect the new policy, or is that, it sounded like there's some word changes there?
Yeah, specifically because a lot of the procedure that was in the old policy needs to have a landing spot, and in fact that the new policy references a form that isn't in existence yet that will be on the website. So yeah, there are some changes that will need to happen on the jmrl.org/bookmobile to reflect these changes. Like a little bit more detail is gonna have to go there.
Right, I was just kind of also asking even about the web address, if you're gonna change it to mobile library, is that gonna be a change there, or is that bookmobile is fine to stay?
Oh, that's a good point. My initial thought on that is that Bookmobile is okay for now, that's the primary way that we're providing mobile library service, and the vehicle itself is known as the Bookmobile. So I think makes it the most findable.
And shorter.
And shorter, but that's a great point. Let me think on it a little bit too, and see if there's any reason to make it a broader umbrella.
I would agree.
And
that-
what kind of plans in the future are you thinking of, Mike? Is that, drone?
I think ideally what we would have is a second mobile outreach vehicle that wouldn't necessarily be a collection with a stop. That right now the Bookmobile has a collection, you walk on, you browse it like it's a driving branch basically. But ideally we would have more staff and a secondary vehicle that could go to all these events that are happening during the day and things like that. So we could have one crew off doing Bookmobile service at stops and then another crew out doing outreach. But I'm sorry, I think I cut you off, Peter.
I was just gonna say, I agree that the term bookmobile is like way more widely understood than mobile
Talking
library.
about branding, yeah. Does that answer your question, Meredith?
Yeah, no, I was just curious if the site, because it just sounded like we're kind of shifting away from the bookmobile title of this policy, and I just was curious if we're gonna have the public understand that, or we're just saying like that's fine to have it be behind the scenes.
Yeah, a lot of library systems are no longer calling their bookmobiles, they call them mobile libraries. I don't have a super strong opinion about them.
I would think that the people would still would need time to digest that.
I think it's part of the overall library, the public library's mission over the last 20 years to explain to people that like, we're not just offering books here, there are other services, but it's hard to give up on something as well known as, especially when JMRL has one of the longest continuously operating ones in the country, I believe. So.
Any other discussion about that? Last item on the formal agenda was potential motion for acceptance of the Virginia Commission for the Arts Grant. You should all have a letter in your handouts. For the arts, awarded $1,300 for children's programming.
Yes, and just to give a little background there, this is a Virginia touring grant. The purpose of this grant is to increase opportunities for Virginians to experience high-quality performing arts events and promote professional Virginia artists. So that's from the Virginia Commission for the Arts there. The presenters seeking support for performances select and book artists from the VCA's touring artist roster, which features vetted Virginia artists and ensembles. Fostering diverse performances across the state, this program provides Virginians with enriching arts experiences that extend beyond their immediate communities. So JMRL is planning to book Jeff Marsh, a Roanoke-based professional magician, clown, mime, and circus tycoon, which I have questions about, for several performances as part of the regional summer performance series. So the
Okay, this is the summer.
Children's Services wrote this grant in order to pay for our regional summer program that will happen throughout all of our branches.
And because this is a grant, we have a motion to accept the grant. Anybody would like to read that? Or if anyone has any more questions, I'm sorry. No?
I'll read it.
Okay.
I move that JMRL accept the Virginia Commission for the Arts
The grant
granted allocation up to $1,300 and authorize the expenditure of that funding to support children's programming.
All those in favor?
Hi.
Opposed? All right, good.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, the library director's report.
Okay, just to give a budget update, we're pretty much in a holding pattern at this time of year. Not a lot has changed since we met last, this board met. We're still looking good across all jurisdictions, recommending full funding. Charlottesville has adopted their budget for fiscal year 26, so JMRL's entire request is in there. Louisa is voting tonight on theirs. The expectation is that it will pass and that full funding for JMRL will be there. Albemarle's voting May 7th, Greene May 13th, Nelson June 10th. So over the next few weeks, we'll have final confirmation about fiscal year 26's budget. Staff are completing a draft equipment budget. The library board's budget and finance committee is going to meet on May 8th to review and craft a recommendation for the full board to review at your busy May meeting. I just wanted to share a note that JMRL received from one of the AARP volunteers doing tax aid at the Louisa County Library. They said, I just wanted to thank you for the support of the AARP tax aid program. We completed another successful season at the Louisa Library, completed 123 tax returns, which was an increase over last year. The word's getting around. The room has been very convenient and easy to set up. So that's a service that they're using the rooms there, but JMRL has made some accommodations to allow for more hours basically so that people can come in and get tax help. I'll remind everyone of the annual How-To Festival at the Central Library, which is this Saturday, May 3rd. The tag there is learn 30 things in 3 hours. Rumor has it there will be llamas present this year. The whole schedule is up on JMRL's blog. It's always a very fun day, and you learn a lot of interesting things. So if you get a chance on Saturday, pop by the Central Library in Charlottesville.
Is it llamas with one L or two?
Thank you. Good clarification.
I'll do.
Tony and I have been talking a little bit about issues that JMRL has had with our largest vendor of books and materials, because as a patron, Tony has noticed it and holds that he's had taking a longer time to be fulfilled. And you might notice it if you walk by a hold shelf at any of your libraries that there are less books there than there are normally. So basically the top vendor for public library materials that JMRL's used for years is experiencing major delays. They are in some contract negotiations with publishers, and they have set back their publication schedule or making those available for public libraries for the last 6 months to a year, basically. A lot of orders are being shifted to other vendors, but unfortunately, every public library in the country is doing the same thing. So these other smaller vendors are scaling up. We're hoping to see a resolution here soon enough. But you might hear from patrons, or you might notice yourself when they come in and say, geez, it's taking a long time to get this new book, which is supposedly published on this date. So these are some ongoing issues. We're weathering the storm here. I hope a resolution will come soon. There's not too much we can do to impact, to advocate for change there. But it is a real problem. We've been slower in getting new releases than we have been in the past. 2 more things. So a few months ago, I mentioned that the fire pump at the Central Library was going to need to be replaced. This is the pump that provides the water to the fire suppression system, which is the sprinkler system at the main library. At that time, I talked to you about a potential closure for the Central Library for up to a week while that was happening. But the project timing was moved up. It's underway right now. It started last week. It's on hold this week while a new HVAC system is being installed in the lab there. So there's a lot of Central is kind of a construction zone these days. But the new fire pump is in and needs reconfiguring. You might notice if you go in the building, and certainly if you come to How-To on Saturday, you'll notice that the building is under fire watch while this happens. So you also might get a question about this. There's a sign on the door that says this building is under fire watch. So what does that mean? The fire alarms are working just fine. If there's a fire in the building, the alarms will go off. They'll notify the fire department who we've been in touch with. They're aware of this scenario. They'll come and take care of it. The fire suppression system is not working. So there's no sprinklers that will come on if their fire alarms go off. So we've had to bring on temp employees. This is a requirement of Fire Watch by the fire marshal. There's folks who during open hours are circulating the building and making sure that nothing is on fire.
It's a good job. Well,
so we've been in close contact with the fire marshal who helped come up with the safety parameters. They're on alert that no suppression is available for the next few weeks. So you'll see signage at the door. It's a fire department requirement that we notify everybody who's coming in or working in the building that there's limited fire suppression. There is no increased danger of fire, just less capacity to suppress it if it happens during the next month or so. So I wanted you all to be aware because you might hear, or you might see it and say, what does this mean? Why is this building under fire watch?
And it's no coincidence that our next meeting is at Central Library.
Yeah. Hopefully by that, actually, I don't know, it'll be close. And then last, I mentioned a revamp of the summer reading program this year. So, and really, I'm not doing it justice by not getting Megan and Heather in here. Just wanted to briefly go over some of the highlights of the change in case you yourself have participated, because it is at all 3 service ages. You can, as an adult, participate in summer reading. There's a teen summer reading and there's a children's summer reading. The goal is to improve access and continue participation all summer long. So historically, we have seen a push in the beginning of the year. Kids get out of school, families come into the library, a bunch of signups happen right then. Then as we track program attendance throughout the year or throughout the summer, it tails off, right? So how do you keep kids engaged throughout, or adults or teens? So starting May 29th, you can start pre-registration. It's open throughout the whole challenge. You get a prize immediately upon registering, and the logging is for reading minutes, which is a change from what we've done in the past. So instead of challenges the past few years, like complete these, read a book with a red cover, or read a book about animals, or whatever it might be, it's how many reading minutes you've done throughout the summer. You can either track that on Beanstack, which is the app that we have used for a few years, or you can do it on paper and staff will enter it for you. So you get a free tote bag and entered in the grand prize drawing just for registering for the challenge, and then a free book and another entry in the grand prize after reading 300 minutes, another step for 600 minutes, moving on like that. You can collect prizes at any JMRL branch. And what counts as reading? There's reading a book, of course, but also attending certain library programs, going to a story time, book club, reading a recipe as you cook, listening to an audiobook or a story read aloud to you. So if you're a parent reading to a child. And there are also optional challenges similar to the challenges that we've done in the last few years. Pretty flexible on that. If it's a literary activity, I think the staff will be like, great, good job, thank you, thanks to the library. So we're also doing an increased PR push this year for summer reading. So just because I had mentioned it and it was part of the strategic plan that I talked about, like there is a bit of a revamp, and you should try it yourself, try Beanstack. And I don't think you all are eligible for the grand prize. At any rate, yes, I will make Heather and Megan available for more questions, but likely in May, we're already set. So by the time we could get them for a CE, summer's going to be halfway over, but still they can give nothing else at the end of summer. Here's how it went. Here's if we saw any improvement based on those tweaks. That's all I have to report.
I have one question on
Please.
that, when you were talking about the publication issue with
Yes.
these new books, have you, is there an alert on the website?
We
that
haven't done any public messaging about it.
Yeah.
That's something to consider, though. You know, we're reaching a point
I mean,
where,
rather than us, like if we hear
Right, right.
somebody, one of our friends complaining,
yeah, let
maybe it
me
should
talk
be-
to staff about that. That might not be a bad idea, you know.
but you're working on
Right, there's not too much we can do to work on it. I mean,
it. You're
we're
aware.
aware, right? And we are working on it in the sense that we're trying to source other vendors that can provide the same services. There's
I
also
mean, I think
some-
that would be helpful for the public.
Good checkoffs instead of them grumbling. I ordered that book such and such time and I'm gonna give them a book.
Other matters, anything we want to discuss? We have not yet touched on? Okay, so for our May agenda, it'll be a 2-pager, right? We're gonna have continuing education from
Brad Hilton on my tab.
right on Ave. We'll have another fines and fees working group report,
Correct.
second reading of the 4.41 policy. What else we?
Is that the director review?
It is time for the director's annual review.
Right.
So that is a special closed session that will take place during the meeting at Central. Which is nice because my office is at Central, so instead of. Get some work done. Budget committee should have a report, including a first discussion of the equipment budget for the full board.
Automatic renewals.
Automatic renewals. It will be time to, either May or June, discuss the board meetings and budget schedule for next fiscal year, so I could at least present a draft to you all. If you recall, we always do Green, Louisa, and Nelson for a visit from the library board, but currently we're rotating the other two branches in and out, so that would mean next year would be visits to Crozet and Gordon Avenue. So I can have it scheduled for you all.
Other items you can think of? Not set in stone, so if you think of something, you can always add it. It's fine. All right. If not, may I hear a motion to adjourn? Those in favor?
Bye.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Krista, can you let Yelena know that we're.
Send it directly out.